Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Tell me about your childhood.
Oh boy. Well, you know, I come from a lovely, happy family at the time. I was very happy growing up with 2 older brothers and a younger sister. And I was sort of into helping the family. My dad wasn't too well. And so I worked on the local farm with my brother and started delivering milk. This is when I was about 9, 10 years old. And we'd sing the Everly Brothers songs. This was like in the early 50s. And that developed to, my brother started singing Elvis Presley songs. And then, of course, life changed, you know. I kept on working on the farm, but I thought, I don't want to do this all the time. It's a bit too much. And my brother had a band called the Warriors. And they had 2 singers, actually. And the other singer went to be a hairdresser. So my brother said, why don't you join the band? We can do some Everly Brothers songs, you know. And that's what I joined. I joined the band, and a lot of things happened at that time. It was like early 60s. And I had this trip down to Liverpool. I was working as a second man to a lorry driver, a truck driver. You know, you keep them awake. And we traveled down from Accrington, where I was born, to Liverpool, delivering these bricks to build houses. And just one fine day I was down there and picking up sugar and flour to take back to the small town. And I saw these kind of hippies. They were called hippies in those days. They were called mods, modern people, modern rockers or whatever they're called, coming down this alleyway. And I said, what's happening up there? He said, well, up there is the Cavern. And that's where the Beatles became famous. So I ran up and checked it out. And I asked the manager who was standing outside, and I said, I've got a band called the Warriors, you know, do you think we could play here? He said, I don't know about that, but you can come down next Monday and we'll try you out. But there's no money in it. So eventually we went down and started playing at the Cavern. You know, this is 1963. And about 6 months later, my brother gave me a shout and said, look, we're going to go and see the Beatles at the Southport, which is just north of Liverpool. And the Beatles had this song called Love Me Do on the radio all the time. So off we went to see the Beatles, and it changed my life. Just wanted to be a Beatle from then on, you know.
Well, I read somewhere that you have said on several occasions that the 60s were much about drugs and trying to be the Beatles.
Yeah, you wanted to be a Beatle. I started talking like I was from Liverpool. My mum didn't like it. And, you know, the 60s was an amazing, incredible time for music, for theater. So many things happened in the 60s, and that's why the big sort of development of the hippiedom, or, you know, make love, not war, things like that. And you'd listen to what John Lennon said, and he came up with some great statements about life and things like that.
So you spend the 60s learning how to use drugs and learning how to cover the Beatles.
Exactly.
When is the next breakover moment for you? When life changed, professional life changed dramatically?
Well, I was with my band for about 6 years, and I left them because they wouldn't rehearse. They told me to go away, and not actually in those words, but they just told me to go away. And I try to wake them up in the morning. Come on, we've got to go rehearse. Let's make some great music, because I'd started hearing music of all sorts and listening to Frank Zappa and great bands that were happening in America at the same time. The Beach Boys, of course. Yeah. And the idea of making music just became more intense, to the point that I sort of lost my way mentally, if you like. Too much drugs, too much everything, you know. And eventually found myself in London and wanted to join a band. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a singer in a band. And one lucky time, I was working in this bar above a very famous rock club called the Marquee Club. So I'm working in the bar above that, and all these people are coming in, you know, very famous people like Pete Townsend, Jimi Hendrix, who were playing at the Marquee Club. And I was there working away, and the manager of the bar said, look, there's a guy over there, he's a bass player, and he's you know, asking me if he want a singer. You don't know. He's just got a band going. So I went over and I met Chris Squire, who was like 6'3", and I'm looking up at this guy, and all we talked about was Paul Simon and the songwriting that he does and things like that. And he had a band called the Mabel Greer's Toy Shop. So I joined the band for like a day. The drummer left, and so we had to start looking for a drummer. And I kept saying to Chris, Mabel Greer's Toy Shop is a long name. Can we not shorten it a little bit? So we were rehearsing one afternoon, and you know, I came up with the idea of life. He came up with the idea of world, and the guitarist Peter Banks said, "Why don't we call ourselves Yes?" And that was one of the big moments. We just looked at each other and said, "Is it the Yes?" He said, "No, no, Yes."